Hello. Tonight I decided to do a different kind of format video. I decided to do a video rebuttal. I found an interesting video aimed at atheists on YouTube earlier, and I figured that I would try my hand at a response. Unfortunately, comments were disabled on that video. So this isn't actually going to be a video response on the person who posted its channel. I just have to hope that they end up seeing it. But before I get into that, I just wanted to take a moment for the victims of the Boston bombing during the race. My thoughts go out to the victims and their families. And well, it's too early. As of the time that this is being recorded, there's no word on who's responsible. No one's claiming responsibility for it. But you know, events like this, no matter who is responsible or who the victims are, they're always tragic. But if we let it interrupt our normal lives, the terrorists win. With that in mind, let's continue. The video in question was posted by a YouTuber named God Is My Father. Now, it's not a video of him, it's just a video of a pastor that he uploaded under the title of Reply to an Atheist, Don't Be Ignorant. This guy has a point, watch it. A very eloquent title, if I don't say so myself. So let's get right into it, shall we?
Often I'd go out on a limb for God. I was in Hungary and the Berlin Wall fell, and the universities opened up. And so the president of a university, a communist university in Czechoslovakia, Hungary.
Already you're being intentionally vague, I think. I'm already not believing the premise of this video one bit. You're not naming the university. You're naming the city that the university is, but you don't name the actual university. Now, I looked into it. Now, there very well may have been a university in the city you mentioned at the time that you mentioned, the fall of the Berlin Wall. However, the only university listed in that city opened up in 1992. Now, this is quite a bit after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Your visit could have been before the fall of the Berlin Wall, since you're speaking about communism. However, there's no listing of a university in that city during that time. So, already, I don't believe your premise, but continue, please.
Came and he said, we want you to come and speak at this university. And so I said, fine. And he said, now here's the ground rules.
Ah, the ground rules. What kind of ground rules did the evil, atheistic communists force on you?
We are going to have one of our communist astronomers speak. Your topic is astronomy. You have to speak for 1 hour and show that there's a God from astronomy. Then our astronomer is going to speak for 1 hour and show why there is no God on astronomy. And then the students are going to ask questions.
They asked you to debate a communist astronomer to prove the existence of God. Okay. I'm on board. Let's see where this goes.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm happy to speak anytime I can, but I'm not an astronomer. I'm a theologian.
Well, that's very comforting of you to admit that you don't have scientific knowledge in that area. Very few apologists that I've come across are that forthcoming with the limits of their knowledge. Most people claim to have some kind of scientific backing to their claims. At least you are honest enough to come out and say, no, I'm not an astronomer. My area is theology. Kudos to you.
But I got some lectures on astronomy, and so I said, Lord, it's okay, I'll do it. But, you know, you've got to be wise. And so I said to this brother, I said, now, brother, I'm happy to come, but since I'm your guest, I want your astronomer to go first. He can show me how to do it.
Seems like you're trying to manipulate. Seems like you're trying to have this guy go first simply so you can poke holes in what he's saying and make it seem like your position is the default position, as opposed to actually presenting evidence in favor of your position. Because if you go first, that means you are required to present evidence in favor of your side of the argument. Whereas if the other guy goes first, you're in a position to actually just discredit him rather than make your argument more credible. A little dishonest, it seems to me.
I didn't want to speak and then him raise questions on what I was saying.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Confirmation. So you're not quite as honest as I was initially giving you credit for.
I wanted him to speak and then me raise questions, because I don't have to know a lot, but I not ask questions.
Such as, who's ever heard of a talking snake?
So, I got to the university.
I'm with you, Asian man. Not buying this story one bit.
When I came to the university, the president met me, and he was nervous. His face was red, and he said, Pastor, we have got a major problem. The astronomer has an emergency appointment, and he can't make it. I said, that's no problem. Just give me 2 hours, that's all. So I spoke to the students on archaeology and astronomy.
You spoke to the students on astronomy and archaeology after having already admitted that you don't have scientific knowledge. You're a theologian. Whatever happened to the humility you were exhibiting earlier?
At the end of the lecture came the question and answer period. So one student, I could see him, he looked over at his professors. Professors are sitting in one place, and you have to understand, this is a dyed-in-the-will, hard communist area. And, you know, I was like the lamb thrown to the wolves. But if you have the Lamb of God in your heart, lambs can slay dragons.
What?
So, first student raises his hand. Dr. Finley. Well, I was no doctor. I'm just a simple, humble preacher.
The humble brag, a favorite of theologians. I'm no doctor, just a simple, humble preacher. But you still felt it necessary to include the part where he confused you for a doctor. Very humble.
Dr. Finley, I have a question. Yes, what's your question? When the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin went up there in space, he looked for God and didn't find him. He didn't see him. Pastor Finley, I want to know, have you personally seen God? And if you haven't, how can you believe? We don't believe.
With the exception of the first part of that question, it's a reasonable question. How can you believe something without seeing it? Let's see what you say about that.
You know, the Bible says that God will give you answers you've never thought about before. And the Lord gave me an answer that I had never thought about until that moment. I said, may I ask you a question? But I really don't want to ask you. I'd like to ask the faculty. This is one of the most prestigious universities in all of Hungary. And I know that your faculty has PhDs from a variety of disciplines, and your faculty is very honest. So I want to leave God out, and faith out, and the Bible out, and I just want to ask the faculty some questions, then I'll come back and answer your question. He said, fine. So now, faculty, of all the knowledge in the world, how much knowledge do your students have?
Flawed premise. You're acting as though knowledge has a quantifiable amount, as if there's a set amount of things that we can possibly know. There isn't. There's always more that we can know. So, right off the bat, question makes no sense.
Let me give you an example. There are well over 2,000 spoken languages in the world. In the country of New Guinea alone, there are 700 dialects. Let's suppose we have a quiz right now and give your students dialects, a quiz on dialects. How many of the 700 dialects in New Guinea could your students speak? Another question. Let's suppose we gave your students a quiz on the 13th Ming dynasty of China and the 58 emperors in the 13 Ming dynasty and all of their wives and the names of their children. Let's suppose that there are 10,000 new books printed a day. How many of have your students read? Of all the knowledge of biochemistry in the world, do your students know 95% of all the biochemistry knowledge? Do they know 90% of all the biochemistry knowledge, 50%? Take histology. Of all the knowledge of histology in the world, and I said, let's say that knowledge is a body of 100%. Would you say that your students know 90% of all there is to know in the world? They said no. I said, just intellectually, did they know 50% of all there is to know? No. Did they know 20% of all there is to know? Of all this great body of knowledge, of every fact and knowledge in the world, let's say your students know 5%. Just from an intellectual standpoint, they said, well, Dr. Philly, they don't know 5%, but I'm going to give them 5%.
The doctor comes back, and this time you don't correct anybody on that. I find that interesting. The problem I'm seeing with this argument is the fact that you seem to be making the case that if we don't know everything, then we can't know anything, which is typical presuppositionalist garbage. But let's see if that's the territory you go into.
If your students know 5% of all there is to know, it means that they don't know 95% of all there is to know. Intellectually, is that a good argument? Yeah, if you know 5%, you don't know 95%. Now let me ask you my next question. If by your own admission your students only know 5% of all there is to know, could it be possible that God exists in the 95% of the knowledge they don't have?
God of the gaps argument. That's your knockdown. We don't know something, therefore God. This one's pretty infantile. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we can't know something.
Is that possible? I looked at those faculty members and they said, Dr. Finley, that's possible. He could exist in the 95% of the knowledge they don't have. I said, now, okay, let's suppose you only have two alternatives. Alternative number one. Your first alternative is that you live and you die. And that's it. You're dead. You live, you die. You're an advanced animal. You're maybe a little more intelligent than the animal creation, but you live and die, and that's it. Your second alternative is that there's a loving God that loves you and cares for you. And although you can't explain all the questions of life, you can't explain often why bad things happen to good people, the second possibility is that there is a loving God that cares for you. And when ultimately you die, He has incredible happiness prepared for you from all eternity.
You're giving a false dichotomy here. I've already covered in a previous video exactly why your argument is wrong, or at least flawed. You're giving an A or B choice, where A is atheism, B is theism, but theism is broken up into literally thousands of smaller pieces. You're making the argument that your side is against the atheist side, and those are the only two sides available, but it's not the case.
Now, I'm not asking you to believe, I'm just asking you one of two questions. If you could choose one of those two, if they both were believable, and you could choose one of the two, to live, not understand pain, suffering, go through life alone, and die and have worms eat your body, or have a sense of your worth in the sight of a supreme being, and one day, if you die, know that you will live with Him forever in eternity when our Lord comes again. If those were your only two choices, and if both were believable, which would you choose?
That's a neat little trick right there, where you just described the atheist position in the worst, most negative possible terms and dressed your side up as if there were absolutely no downside to it. Let me see if I can pull the same trick. Would you rather live your life knowing that you ultimately are responsible for your own actions and your own choices, that your life is your own, you are free to live the way you want to live, and that every choice you make is yours to make, and that you will not be arbitrarily punished simply for not having a belief in the right deity? Or would you rather go through life in fear from a tyrannical, bigoted bully living in the sky who watches everything you do every day of your life and judges every action? Which would you rather believe in? But the larger point here is reality does not conform to what we want it to be. Reality is reality no matter what. Just because we want something to be true does not make it true.
They said, well, we'd be a fool not to choose a second alternative if both were believable. Then I said, look, first, you're not an atheist. Because an atheist says, I know God doesn't exist. But you say God may not exist in the knowledge I have, my 5%, but he may exist in the 95% of the knowledge I don't have. So you're not an atheist. At best, you're an agnostic. Secondly, you're not even an agnostic, because an agnostic says God may not exist, but I don't even care if he does or he doesn't. But you just told me you did care, that if there was this more abundant life. So what you really are seekers.
Problem with definitions. An atheist is someone who does not have a belief in God. Theism is belief in a deity. Atheism, without belief in a deity, has nothing to do with a claim of knowledge. That's where agnostic comes in. Without knowledge, agnostic. Without belief, atheist. You can be both. And I'm getting sick and tired of hearing this argument being made by people who, quite frankly, know better.
And that's why the Lord sent me to you today. And you know, the Lord worked some real miracles. The Lord worked miracles. We talked to those students for hours. God moved in that student body. And we saw student after student come. I had brought Bibles with me. And I said, whoever wants a Bible after, I'll give you one. They came to get Bibles.
I notice how these stories always somehow end with entire universities suddenly converting to Christianity. There's never any disappointments. There's never any holdouts. They never talk about that kind of thing. And that right there is why I don't believe this story. But let's go back to your argument that God could exist in the 95% of knowledge that we don't have. You're not making a claim for the Christian God. You're making a claim for the deistic concept of God. And you are pulling a bait and switch at the end. Once people say, oh yeah, a God could exist in the 95% of knowledge we don't have, you're switching it out for Yahweh. It is intellectually dishonest, and I think you know it. Now, I prepared a little segment to explain exactly why that argument is completely invalid. As for the rest of this video, it's more just, the story's over. It's him basically talking about, oh, go out and preach the word, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Really nothing of interest there. But here is my rebuttal to his argument. Enjoy.
You made the argument previously that God could exist in the 95% of knowledge that human beings as a whole do not possess. Again, I said that this was argument for the deistic concept of God, and not the specific claim that you yourself are holding to. And then you pulled a bait and switch and said that if God could exist in that 95%, then it was naturally your God. The problem with this argument is that while we cannot disprove the existence of a God, we most certainly can disprove the existence of certain concepts of that God. Let's take a look at a different type of mythological creature, if you will, to illustrate this point. We'll use leprechauns as an example. We cannot honestly say that we can disprove the existence of leprechauns. Anytime someone who fervently believes that leprechauns are real, and when we present evidence to the contrary, they can simply counter with, yes, but they're invisible, or their magic hides them from human perception. But there are specific leprechauns we can say do not exist. I'm going to draw a few parallels here. Let's say, for instance, that the Abrahamic God, Yahweh or Allah, depending on your perspective, is the leprechaun from the Leprechaun series of movies. Then we will say that Lucky from the Lucky Charms commercials is Jesus, and Muhammad is the leprechaun from Mobile, Alabama. Now, again, we cannot disprove the existence of leprechauns in general. However, the leprechaun in Mobile, Alabama, while there were several witnesses, just like for Muhammad, we can pretty much assure that it was not a leprechaun.
Could be a crackhead that got hold to the wrong stuff.
When it comes to Lucky, we can also guarantee that this is not a real leprechaun. We can go back into the history of the cereal company that created Lucky Charms. We can more than likely find the name of the person who developed Lucky Charms, and even if we can't find the name of the person who developed Lucky Charms, we can probably find the person who designed Lucky himself, the original animators even. So we can confirm that Lucky does not exist. As for the repulsive leprechaun from the Leprechaun series of movies, who I would argue is actually less repulsive than Yahweh, but that's besides the point. We know that this was played by Warwick Davis. So we have confirmation that all three of these leprechauns are not real. We have not disproved the existence of leprechauns as a concept, but these three we most certainly can say are false. And that is why I deny the existence of your God.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If it gets a good enough response, I may do more of these in the future. Before I go, I wanted to bring up another YouTube channel. Give a little shout out to the channel Just a Gamer X. I recently saw a video from him talking about how he is a former Jehovah's Witness, still living with his Jehovah's Witness parents, and he wanted to possibly start a support group for people in a similar situation. Now, I myself, I've never been a Jehovah's Witness, so I can't relate, but I do feel for him, and I figured that I would give him what little exposure I possibly can. Right there is the link to his channel and the video, and if you happen to be a former Jehovah's Witness who lived with Jehovah's Witnesses or still do live with Jehovah's Witnesses, please check his channel out.